So recently we have sent a newsletter to all our subscribers asking for some questions so we could answer them during this video. So that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah, so we received hundreds of emails and replies, and we couldn't possibly answer every single question in this 15, 20, 30-minute video. So some we're going to cover, and then the others we will either reply to you individually, or we will create a specific video covering your topic that you asked the question on. So yeah,
some of the questions were like even the same. They were repeating.
There was a few that were the same. So you might have your question, even though we don't put your name to the question. Maybe you did ask the same question, but we'll try and cover it in this video.
Yeah. So let's get starting. So the first question is, how did you guys meet? Sean is asking.
Now this is a question that has been asked us many times. I mean, more fingers than I've got on my hand.
100 times. Yeah.
So the story goes that it was probably back in, I think it was 2009, 2010, maybe around that sort of time.
2008.
Yeah. And I heard some of Ed's sound design on the internet on certain sound packs, preset packs. And I was wondering at the time, I was like, who is making these sounds? And especially back then, it was head and shoulders above everything else I'd heard. So I managed to track him down, emailed him.
Yeah.
And then
I used to live in London back then.
That's it.
Yes.
So yeah, Ed was in London. We organised a get-together. I went to his studio, in his home studio in London. And yeah, I mean, the rest is pretty much history. We made a few tracks since then as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
And then 2015, we set up Audiotent, and here we are now.
Started the journey of Audiotent. Yeah, it's been 10 years. It's going to be next year.
So yeah,
since we launched the store. And,
so maybe we'll do something special for that 10-year anniversary. Okay, next question is, which MIDI tools do you use to create your melodies, arps, bass lines, etc.? That's the question from Nico. Well, I'd say 80, 90% of the time we're playing it in by hand and then quantizing it. And for me, it would be, I'd play maybe the top line and then I'd overdub maybe a bass line or like a little chord stab in between, or embellish that first idea that I had. Never would I sort of be playing all of those notes at the same time, but I think it's something magical when you do one run and then you're sort of doing something else over the top. It gives you a bit more time and a bit more space to feed something in.
Yeah, it's the same likewise.
Yeah.
I would just record it in MIDI, or sometimes we would use sequencers that, you can record MIDI in Ableton. So we use like Oxy.
Yeah, so this one
here.
The Oxy one.
Oxy is a very good sequencer. So you can generate a random MIDI melody, and then you kind of just move notes around till you find something that locks and, that sounds nice for you. But yeah, sometimes that involves a little bit of tweaking. But most of the time, just like Neil said, the MIDIs, we don't use any special tools. It's played by hand. And if you look at our Note series releases, which are basically the MIDI melodies and harmonies and bass, all of these individual files have been played by hand and edited, by us too. So yeah, that's how we work with the MIDI.
Next one is from Kevin, and he says, have you got some advice to control the low frequency, specifically sub-frequency less than 90 hertz when using hardware processing? So synthesizers such as Moog, Pro One, Grandmother. He says he read on some website that a low cut wasn't all time necessary because the phase was often deteriorated.
Yes, I think when it comes to low end and synthesizers, it's quite easy in a way because you can, make your sound using synthesis. So if the sound that you want is less subby, you can push up the resonance a little bit, and certain filters would drop that low end. So we are very cautious of the sound when we're making it. So if the kick is hard, when we make the bass for it, we make sure that the bass is not sub heavy. If the kick is very light, it's just doing the tap, the rhythm, then you can have a very huge sub bass, and that influences the way you synthesize the bass. So there is very little to no processing needed whatsoever to combine these elements together, or there's no special treatment that we would do, like 90 hertz and downwards, or any frequency. It's just about getting the very right sound and make sure that bass is not conflicting with your kick drum, and that will just carry the entire track.
That's it. Getting it right at the source is a big thing, isn't it? Choosing the right sample, or if you've already recorded that bass part and it's like I must use this bass. I mean, volume is another thing, isn't it? If something's louder, it's going to be more prominent, obviously, in the mix. So if there's just too much sub, just bring that down in level. Or if you have to go last resort, then just a low shelf, not a filter, just shelve it down and reduce it by a few dB. So
also it very depends if you have a few instruments, different synthesizers at your disposal. They tend to produce, focus on different areas. Like we did this recording yesterday, and we used the Pro Mars synthesizer for the bass, and then we go, maybe let's try the Model D, and we play the same MIDI model in the Model D, and it was sounding too big for the mix we were doing. It had just more the huge low end, and it wasn't right. So I was like, okay, let's just come back to that one. So in some instances, the Model D would be the very obvious choice. It's like, it's a bass machine. But in other cases, if your mix requires a low mid-range bass, you maybe switch the synthesizer. That's all you need to do. Switch the filter.
It was mental, wasn't it? Because it was the same octave and everything, and it was we tried the same sort of patch, just a basic sawtooth with the filter down, and the difference was night and day how they just sat in the mix. So
that's why you collect the instruments. They have a different flavor. They have a different sound. It's like paint. You painting, there's different colors, and just pick the one that fits the work that you are doing in the moment. So the next question, Matthias is asking, can we expect new presets for the Moog Subsequent this year?
We would like to, but I think time and other packs that we've got sort of lined up for the rest of this year is probably not going to be possible, because what leads into the next question, it does take a fair amount of time to create the pack. So I would say we'd like to be able to get one finished, but it's probably not going to be this year. It's probably beginning of next year, maybe. I'd hope to like to say.
And then because we have already 2 libraries for Moog Subsequent, 2 libraries of presets done. And it's been a while since the last one, but they've been very well-received libraries. So it is definitely the 3rd release is coming, but we don't know yet if it's going to be this year. Definitely not.
It won't be another year. Hopefully not, but don't mark my words. But if there's any sounds in particular you're looking to get out of that Sub 37, let us know in the comments below, and we can do our best to sort of create some of those and include them in the pack. And that brings us on to the next one, which is we get asked this a lot as well, and this is from Carlos, is how long does it take you to create a preset library?
It is very challenging to answer this accurately, because certain instruments, they are very complex in their nature, and it takes a lot of time to dial them in. So there are some tools that are quite relatively simple, and it would take 3-4 times less to do the same preset. So it's very varying. And also, if you had a block of time, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, where you just come in and you just no distractions, all you do is do sounds, you could do a full library in that amount of time. But because we have so many other things, we're flying constantly, filming studio feeds, meeting other artists, and we're doing the day-to-day business tasks, customer service, all that carries the Audiotent brand. That makes the development of this product much longer. So something that it would take 2-3 weeks might end up being 3 months because we are, dividing the time and like for different tasks.
Yeah. Okay, next question is, how did you guys teach yourself sound design? And that's from Fabian.
It's a good question, Fabian. Yeah, I mean, my introduction to sound design goes as early as, I think, year 2005. When I moved to London, I was just, I think, 16 years of age back then, and I studied music technology, and I was introduced to the synthesis and, sound design as part of one of the lectures. And back then, it just caught my attention, and I spent a lot of time going back home and kind of, working on soft synths, figuring them out. It just by myself, really reading some manuals and, learning what the filter does, what the resonance does, what are the envelopes, how they affect the sound, spending a lot of time just kind of exploring different synths. And that's, it was like just a fun thing to do as being a teenager, I guess. And it continues to interest me. That's my way of learning.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just using the plugins, using the hardware synthesizers, getting to know the controls, and it just happens over time. You sort of know what a certain oscillator is going to sound like, a certain filter, and how you can affect that in many different ways, not just like the basic structure of how a synth works. And for me, one of the biggest breakthroughs was getting into modular, because you cannot make a sound out of the modular unless it's semi-modular without putting a cable in. And there was times where you're like thinking, there's no sound coming out of this. Well, you have to go through the full signal flow, and you have to know that to be able to get a sound out. And then it opens up your brain to how you can affect the sound even more by adding LFOs, audio rate LFOs, and feedback patching, and you're not just stuck to a typical architecture of, say, a mini Moog where it's just a
traditional subtractive synthesizer.
Yeah, it really does make you sort of think outside the box, and then you can even down to just trying different cables in different places, and it's like, wow, why is that making that sound now? It's like, okay, because I'm sending this audio rate thing into the filter, which is making it go so fast that it's making this crazy like
harmonics.
Yeah. So a lot of it is just messing about, playing about, and seeing what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, and we have the next question, who also from Fabian. He is asking, how do you guys make your kicks for your sample packs?
This one is, we've got a few different types of packs that we do. So the one obvious one is the synthesized kicks that we do through plugins such as Sonic Academy Kick 2. That is basically sort of using that plugin to generate the sub with synthesis, and then you can add your own top clicks in. So with the top clicks, that's a bit more in depth, where we'll either sample other kicks out, take just the click portion of the kick, resample it, put it back in, maybe put some distortion on it, put a little texture on. So that's that sort of process for doing those synthesized kicks. But when it comes to sample packs,
we have a pure series. So the pure series is really, we're not trying to change and process the sounds. It's just getting the raw machines, sample them as accurately as possible. So the pure series kicks, you will actually see the name of all the drum machines that it came, the individual samples came from, and those were just kind of pure by the nature. But when it comes to these other libraries, like full-size sample libraries, there's a lot of kicks that are layered, processed, so they could have a combination of the low end is coming from a drum machine, but the high end is coming, from just like a sample that is processed. And there's all these different ways to make a kick drum. And there's one library that has been in the works for a very long time that is gonna be just absolutely huge.
Massive.
Kick library, which will have the individual components that you need to make a kick drum, just like transients, the punchy kick drums and the low end of the kick drum. So you can just combine your perfect kick drum in your favorite sampler or DAW, as well as choosing the already made kick drum. It's just a very, very huge library that takes a lot of time. But
it's been in the making for a while.
it's gonna come out this year for sure. What is your mixing strategy plan? Which plugins and techniques to use? Lars is asking.
Ooh, it's quite an in-depth one. This could take, you could write a book on this, or
full
you
mixing
could,
course,
a full course, but
requires another video.
Yeah, but I mean, the just a small segment of that is when we do the demos. It's very rare that we sort of can sit down and do a full mix per se, because there's like 10, often 10, 15 track ideas, would you say? It's all, the keys are changing because we were trying to showcase so many sounds and so many samples within the pack. It's not like you're just putting like this mix to, your two bus processing, and then you're sort of carefully EQing everything to make it all fit. It's because it's changing so much.
Yeah, I would say, when we do the demos, there's hardly any mixing to be done, because we can't really be sculpting the sounds, EQing and compressing to fit them in a mix, because that will change the sound. When you purchase the product, you will think, oh, that sounds different in a demo.
Yeah.
So all these presets, the way you hear in a demo, they are just exactly the presets that are played, and we just make sure that, the kick drum or some additional drums that you find in a demo just work with the groove, and it's all about sound selection in the right moment.
Yeah.
But in terms of mixing, EQs, compression, anything that you hear in our demos, it's basically, there's no mixing. It's just been produced. It has a limiter on a mastering stage to just get that, make sure that the clipping doesn't happen, and that's the demo.
Yeah. It's all down to, again, the amount of times that people ask a similar question, but it's all down to sound selection, isn't it? It's like, if the sound isn't right, it's the classic. If it's not right, just choose a different sound, and that's.
And of course, there are some basics. You can do a low cut if there's a lot of sub rumble frequencies. You do a low cut, and you do a little bit of sidechain to help the kick and the bass in some cases, but. Other than that, in our demos, there's not really like saturation, mixing, overdrive that we would be doing, or even more so for like the full-size libraries. They are just the samples that you get inside the library. So these are just a combination of different samples that work together.
Yeah. Next one is fitting synth presets into a mix that already has multiple synth and bass parts, and that's from John.
Yeah, it's another good question. I think this one is, I would say, there are two things to look at this. If you have too many synths, is there a reason why I have that many synths? The best is to just have as low as amount as you can, because that makes it easier to mix it and to make it sound good. But if you really want to have layers of synthesizers in your track, if you have, say, a long lead that has a long sustain and you want to layer it, you need to think, what is it that my lead is lacking? Maybe it is the transient, so you layer that with the pluck sound, which is short and has a very nice transient. So when you combine them, they complement each other and they're not fighting for the space. Maybe they're different in the frequency range. And the last thing I want to say is about the way you arrange your notation is very important. It's like orchestration. If your synthesizer is playing a C note and then you layer another one with the same note, then you get the conflict. But if you pitch the other synthesizer, like in harmony, like the fifth or seventh, or, whichever the interval is, up or down, then, even though they're kind of similar in timbre, you get the space, like you playing a chord with different synths. So that's one way to layer. I would layer the synths, making sure they have their own space to breathe.
That's good. And then a second question from John was tools to excite or tame white noise percussion to achieve tension without harshness. There's a couple of plugins that spring to mind, especially for taming harshness, which is, I think everyone's heard of it and used it maybe. I can't remember the brand. It's Oki Sound or something. It's Soothe 2, which is phenomenal for taming harshness and any sort of resonant frequencies.
It's like a dynamic EQ that I think that kind of, it follows the frequency, and if something becomes very sharp and
Yeah.
resonant, it will tame down, and you can select the exact range where you want to tame it.
And the level
So,
of
yeah.
control is phenomenal, isn't it? You got the depth, you got the how narrow you want the bands to be. It's really good. And some people even use it for sidechaining kick and bass, which is, you know, another great use of it.
And what was the other part of the question?
Exciting. So, I mean, the same company do that spiff, which is good for transients. That's if you're looking to excite something in that, you know, on the transient, that's a very good plug-in.
If you like transients, yes. But
Yeah.
in terms of you can use the exciters, audio exciters like Isotope do one, and there's other companies that do the, you know, it's like a harmonic saturation. But I personally don't use it.
No.
You know, just make sure if the sound is not aggressive enough to your liking, you can just overdrive it. That works really good for percussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope that answers the question. David says, I have made the transition from hardware to digital, and from having a full warm sound, my mixes are sounding weak and thin. Do you have any techniques and methods while working in a digital domain to achieve a warm and coherent mix? It's quite a bit similar to the mixing question, but
and it's whether the hardware from hardware to digital was the sound generation or the processing side of things. But I mean, if it was a processing side of things, again, it's like if you want something to sound warmer, it's you either need to tame something in the high frequencies or give that little low bump in the low mids or in the low end. But
or use the same tools. I mean, there's so many of these outboard analog synths that are available in a digital format. So maybe you just need to kind of focus on those instead of using more, you know, widely available, like a very like digital synthesizers that don't try to emulate any outboard gear. Same with processing. Instead of taking your standard DAW EQ, maybe just look for something that is very specific to the analog domain, like a Pultec EQ, and use that, or use tape emulations. I mean, but it's down to the workflow. Maybe you were recording your instruments through like a preamp that had a certain aesthetic, and then you just need to find something similar inside digital. But we don't really personally get into the trouble to
hardware
make
to digital,
hardware to digital, that to say that, you know, I think it's all about knowing what you're trying to achieve. If we want to have the drums very sharp and bright, it might appear to be more digital sounding, but it could be really useful for the case. And if we want them to sound vintage and warm, then you just roll some of the top end with the EQ, and you know that replicates maybe some of the tape saturation. Yeah,
it's good. What else we got? So Chris has asked, how do you finish a track? What's the best arrangement for your ideas? For me, there's this way that some people arrange in terms of, they say, oh, go and download, say, 3 or 4 tracks that you like the sound of or like the feel of, bring them into your project and then copy that same arrangement. So it's like, oh, after 1 minute, the bass comes in, after 30 seconds, hi-hats. But I feel that way, you just making more of the same, and it becomes a carbon copy in terms of flow to every other track out there. And I feel like if you've got all the elements that you need for the track will tell you the way it should be like flowing. So, oh, this is where the pad maybe needs to come in, because when I mute the kick out, and it just gives me this feeling of like sense of space there, or the main energy of the track needs to be after like 3 minutes. But I don't think there's any sort of structure you should stick to, especially with electronic music, where you can do what you want. I think it doesn't have to have a 1 minute intro and then the bass come in like every other track. You know, start with the bass from the very first beat if you want.
Yeah, I think it's, to me, as long as you know what is the most important element in your track and you want to make sure that that is the highlight of your track, everything else kind of flows into space nicer. But there's no one specific way. I mean, there's no one specific structure that we use for the arrangement. I mean, it's quite different for the demos that we do because they have to be very fast.
Yeah.
You know, things you want to show, you don't want to, otherwise we end up with a 60-minute demo. So we want to make sure that when we showcase the presets, the changes happen very rapidly.
Yeah.
But obviously it's not the same if you're writing a electronic track for the club where you want maybe 7 minutes, and it's kind of gradual, very gradual, and soft changes of building that energy, dropping that energy. So it requires a different approach. Yeah.
I think that would be a good topic to do a full video on at some stage. It's like, okay, here's our 16 bar loop of, the main elements for a track, and let's just stretch it out and create the full arrangement from what we've got. I think that would be, if you want to see that, drop a comment below and we'll try and make it happen. So next question from Joanne. I'd be happy to see your top plugins from each type of category: delays, reverbs, distortions, compressors.
Okay, Joanne. Yeah. So I think the most plugins that we use are the ones that we spend most time developing presets for. So when it comes to delay, it will be Valhalla delay and
Fab Filter, Echo Boy, Soundtoys.
Yes, and because we already spent all this time making these presets that work for electronic music, and they have all these categories that make sense to us. It's just easier for us then to go back to these plugins and just use the presets that we like, and they sound great. So that's with delays. Yeah, when it comes to reverbs, we have Valhalla.
So reverbs, we've done presets for the Vintage Verb from Valhalla and also Room. And most recently, we've been using the Arturia LX24, which is a clone, or what would you say? Not a clone. It's inspired by the Lexicon 224. So those are our main go-tos for reverbs. I'd say I'm pretty much all the time Vintage Verb, to be fair.
Yes, and for distortions, it's a Fab Filter, Saturn that we use for any kind of saturation, distortion purposes. Other than that, when we do create the sounds, obviously we use the most of the outboard, but the Ableton's distortion is pretty good.
The overdrive, but more so the saturator. I think I really do like that. It's got something about it. It can give some edge, and especially the saturator for like taming the peaks. So a lot of people, we've talked about it, about compression. We don't use compression that much, but with the saturator, you can chop off those peaks, make something perceived as louder, but it's actually quieter if you look at the peak level. So, the Ableton saturator is really good for that, I find. And compressors, again,
if we use the OTT by X for in a very gentle amount, is nice to make something kind of in your face. And then in terms of the mix bus, I like the Shadow Hills, whether it's a Plugin Alliance or UAD. And Neil, you like the SSL a lot? So
SSL, either the Waves or the UAD version. Next question is from Jan, and it's how to EQ correctly and how that flows into the mixing process.
Yeah, when it comes to the, say, demos in particular that you hear in our, on our products, we don't use that much EQ because you want to hear exactly, you want to get the sound that you heard in the demo. So if the synth sounds a certain way, that's how you're hearing it. So we don't really EQ anything. But when it comes to kind of like sound design, if we kind of want something a bit brighter, we tend to use these gentle curves that are kind of rounded. It's almost like what the outboard EQs are doing. And over the time, we tend to like a certain kind of dips and boosts in certain places for like a kick drum or bass, and we just save these curves as we go along. And we have a library for Pro Q. Fab Filter Pro Q, a library of presets that kind of, takes a broad range of the presets that we like. And we also even match some of the outboard.
So we record it. You can, there's a plugin that you can send a signal out and then it monitors it coming back in, and you can see the actual Q and the amount of gain in certain bands. And we've like level matched and match the same curves as our sort of favorite sort of presets within the hardware, and imported those into Pro Q. So yeah, that's quite useful to just, you know, a click of a button and you've got a different shape and a different curve.
But in terms of the original question, how to use the EQ correctly,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know if there is such a way of how to. Everyone is slightly different. Some people tend to kind of boost more. Some people tend to cut more. We don't really go very drastic. I think our EQ kind of curves are quite, you know,
I would never be
gentle. Yeah.
I would never be one for like putting, you know, like raising this like really narrow Q and sweeping around, because when you do that, you sort of almost hunting for peaks, and you know, certain sounds need those peaks to be part of the sound, and if you start notching out all of these peaks, then you're left with nothing.
It's very easy to over EQ some things, and you just become obsessed about every single peak, and you know, start taming everything, and then it just becomes flat. I think that's a lot of the sounds are resonant by their nature. Yeah. Even if you're on a synthesizer, you maybe boosted that resonance, so it really kind of is edgy and sharp, and that's why you like it. Yeah. So there's no reason to then go and EQ that out. Yeah. And there's another question from Jan as well: how to compress? Why and why not to compress? Which compressor and when? So I think we kind of covered it, that we don't really use much compression.
Yeah, the one time I would use it, or a couple of times, would be in terms of shape. If I wanted a drum loop or something to bounce and move in a certain rhythm or create more groove, but not in the terms of like sidechain groove. You can sort of, if you get the release times and the attack times and the ratios, you get this different feel to the loop then. But I mean, more often than not, it's not being used.
You can have, on a drum groove, you can have a certain attitude by using a compressor. If you're kind of, your drums are quite soft and you want it a little bit more kind of harder hitting, so to make it feel like somebody's like playing a harder drum, or if it's electronic drums, just like more spiky transients, and we can use a compressor overall to change the feel of the groove. But in terms of individually compressing different elements or sims, we hardly ever compress anything.
And the final one from Jan is how to get a wide and defined mix. And it's that sort of cliche answer of
send it to Kevin.
Send it to Kevin. It's all about creating contrast with certain elements that are down the middle and certain elements that are wider, and having those alternate in a way, or throughout the space of your track within 4, 5, 6 minutes, having these elements or sections of the track that are super wide, and then it folds maybe back down to something a bit more mono to give that contrast.
The more effects you have on a particular sound, the less definition it tends to have. If you apply too many reverbs and delays, and it's kind of swimming in effects, that definition gets lost. But if you kind of take it a moderate approach, where you have the dry sound in front and a little bit of effects, then to me that is the definition.
Adrian asks, what are some of your go-to techniques for overcoming creative blocks?
We don't really have much creative blocks. I don't know. I think for me the creative block is if I have a headache, or I'm thinking about something else that day that influenced my day, and I don't feel like I can do production work. But in terms of like getting stuck on something, I don't know. Maybe we are the wrong people to ask. But I would say, if you are that stuck, maybe it's changed the pattern that you work in. If you start always your music with a kick drum, started with a lead sound, with a vocal, started with a bass, maybe that will change the way you work, and it will get you through that creative block. But for us, because there's so many projects to juggle, we can be doing a presets one day, sounds the other day, then the next day we're flying, meeting these artists and filming studio feeds. It's always different. So you maybe tend to less be stuck. If we had to make a new piece of music every single day, then maybe we would get into that creative block one day. I hope not, but But if any of you have any good advice on how to get past the creative block, please comment. I think that would be very nice to read.
Yeah. Nice.
So the next question is from Christian. My question should be hopefully a quick one, but when is a good time to use textures? Please note I'm still pretty new to producing, but have noticed these in your packs and curious when you like to use textures and how to use them effectively.
It's a good question. We've got a couple of different types of texture packs. So the one being more like vinyl crackles and like drones, sustained loops, which for me, I would be using them as like a very low level item just to make everything sound as one, like it's been recorded as one thing. And it's very low in the mix, but it just holds everything together, all like your drums and your synth parts. And then if you muted it off, you feel as though there's something missing. And then the other one is like the more rhythmical textures, which are almost like drum patterns, but they've got this certain like feeling and like noisiness and texture.
Yeah, it's very good if you had if you made a drum groove consisting of very clean sounds, a kick drum, a snare drum, a hi-hat, you might feel that it lacks a certain character, and the rhythmic texture is a very good way of adding a certain aesthetic underneath the drum, without kind of going through, say, distortion or something else. And also when you have a rhythmic texture and combine that with your drums, you can process it together as a unique group, and that will kind of bring up the nuances. Like I find if I have something texture on a drum groove and I'm saturating it or compressing it, it would bring up those textures even more, kind of enhancing the character of the drums. So that's a good way to use the texture. But in general, because the electronic music, most of the music that we do uses the synthesizers, that can be very kind of in your face, very dry. You can apply some effects, but it's still quite artificial, versus we're so used to hearing the music, somebody playing piano, guitar, that you hear a lot of detail surrounding us. So it's nice to take a recording of outside, or I don't know, if there's just the water flowing, or it could be anything, and add it underneath your music. And that gives a certain aesthetic, a feel, oh, I'm in this space, I can hear something else. But it doesn't have to be obvious and very loud. It could be very subliminal, and there's a lot of talented producers and artists that are exploiting these techniques very well and using, lots of different textures to give this kind of extra depth and feel to the music.
The realism, isn't it, that you get. I hope that answers the question. And the last one here from the emails is from Zalman. And he asks, if you don't have the equipment like a studio with sound system, what are some ways we could boost our sound?
Yeah, I guess that relates to boost the sound, improve maybe the sound kind of listening experience, he means? Yeah,
and I mean, one way to do that would be through the use of headphones. So getting a decent pair of headphones that you get accustomed to and you know the sound of. And the bonus that you have with a set of headphones is that you could work in pretty much any space, any studio, any bedroom, any living space, or even on holiday, on a plane. You get used to that sort of, those set of speakers that are on your head, basically. And it's very consistent. Whereas, with a treated studio or a dedicated studio space, you have to learn that space, and it has to have certain amounts of acoustic treatment for you to feel as though what you're hearing is a good representation of what translates well. So, a set of headphones, I would say, would be the easiest way to improve your sound if you don't have your own studio.
Yes, or at least a very minimum range of acoustic treatment is also very effective. At least treating the first reflections. If you have a very hard walls in your room or your bedroom or wherever you're trying to set up your music creative space, it's a good idea because you can hear exactly what you're doing in a much more detailed way and make better decisions because of it.
Yeah. And I think there's one more question, actually. It's from Mark on Instagram. You've downloaded Ableton, but don't feel very inspired by just working inside a DAW. What 3 pieces of hardware would you add in your studio, maximum £500 each, to boost creativity?
Yeah. Personally, I think I would buy a synth that is not expensive, maybe Arturia Microfreak, which is affordable, and I would also get some effect pedals. So, you know, a delay, a reverb, a distortion. You can probably for up to 500. You can pick up 4 or 5 of these.
The Boss ones are very affordable.
Yes, and then you can just spend all this time tweaking the synthesizer, trying different combinations of the effect pedals, and I'm sure you would get inspiration from that, and you record it, and then you can create, you know, many more elements inside the DAW after. But to kickstart that creativity, that's what I would buy. I wouldn't just focus on like one expensive piece of gear, rather just have these pedals, synthesizers.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, for me it would probably be a second-hand Electron Digitact or a Syntact, because I think they're a bit more than £500 unless you go on the used market. And probably a Moog DFAM, because that thing it's got pretty much everything you want to create like these sequences. It can do drums, it can do riffs, it can do bass lines. It covers a lot of ground, and you know, if you've got a DAW, you record that one loop in, you say, okay, I've got my kick drum from DFAM, or I've got my percussion sound from DFAM. You've got it in, you've recorded it, and then you just create a new sound on it, maybe do a riff then on DFAM, and you can literally make a full track just using that one piece of gear. I'd probably just go with those 2. And that, I think, sums about everything up. I think we've covered as many as we can in a short space of time. But yeah, thanks for sending in your questions, and we will try our best to do even more next time.
Thank you so much for watching.
Cheers. Oh, before you go, next couple of weeks' time, we've got an interesting studio tour coming up with an artist, electronic music producer, and also instrumentalist for London Grammar, Dot Major. So we went to his studio, what was that, a few weeks back now? We visited for a few hours, had a jam, had a chat.
Had a nice conversation, and we are very much happy to share this with you all. And keep subscribed and keep watching.
See you soon.
See ya.